The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Crawford Industries headquarters in Manhattan, each droplet racing down the glass like tears the building refused to shed. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late October, and the 53rd floor was already alive with tension. Margaret Hayes moved through the executive suite with the kind of invisibility that came from years of practice. Her dark hands gripped the handle of the cleaning cart, wheels squeaking softly against marble floors that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a month. At 42 years old, Margaret had perfected the art of being present without being seen, a survival skill for Black women in spaces that tolerated their labor, but never their voices. She wore the same navy blue uniform she'd worn for 8 years, the Crawford Industries logo stitched above her heart in gold thread. A cruel irony, she sometimes thought, wearing someone's name over your chest while they never bothered to learn yours. "Margaret, did you restock the conference room?" The voice belonged to Sharon Mitchells, the floor manager, a woman whose tone always carried the weight of unspoken judgment. "Yes, ma'am. Fresh coffee, pastries, water bottles. Everything's ready for the 7:30 meeting." Sharon barely glanced at her, already scrolling through her tablet. "Good. They're expecting the Tokyo call this morning. Mr. Crawford himself will be present." Margaret nodded and continued her route, but her stomach tightened. When Richard Crawford, the Richard Crawford billionaire founder and CEO, attended a meeting, it meant something massive was at stake. The entire building could feel it, that electric charge of fear and ambition that pulsed through the ventilation system. She pushed her cart toward the elevators but stopped when she noticed a small figure sitting on the leather bench near the reception area. Her heart sank. "Maya, baby, what are you doing here?" The 11-year-old girl looked up from the book in her lap, her intelligent brown eyes meeting her mother's with that unnerving wisdom she'd possessed since she could speak. Maya Hayes was small for her age, with natural hair pulled back into 2 neat puffs, wearing a worn purple jacket that Margaret had found at a thrift store 3 years ago. The girl still fit in it barely. "School's closed today, Mama. Teacher training, remember?" Maya's voice was soft but clear, with a precision to her words that always made Margaret's chest swell with equal parts pride and fear. Pride because her daughter was extraordinary. Fear because the world had a way of punishing extraordinary Black girls who didn't know their place. "Oh, baby, Margaret pressed her hand to her forehead. She'd completely forgotten. With double shifts and the second cleaning job on weekends, the days blurred together. "I'm so sorry, you should have stayed at Mrs. Chen's." Mrs. Chen had a doctor's appointment. She left a note. Maya held up a crumpled piece of paper. "I took the subway, it's okay." It wasn't okay. None of this was okay. An 11-year-old navigating New York City alone, sitting in a corporate lobby while her mother scrubbed toilets for people who earned in an hour what Margaret made in a year. But what choice did she have? "Just stay here, baby, stay quiet, don't bother anyone. I'll be done in a few hours. Then we'll go get lunch, okay?" Maya nodded, her attention already returning to her book. Margaret noticed the title, Advanced Quantum Mechanics, a Primer, and felt that familiar ache in her chest. Her daughter devoured books the way other kids consumed candy, teaching herself subjects that Margaret couldn't even pronounce. Where it came from, she didn't know. Maya's father had been brilliant too, in his own way. Before the accident took him when Maya was 3, Margaret returned to her cart and moved down the corridor, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different today. The air felt heavier. Through the glass walls of the conference room, she could see executives arriving early, their faces tight with stress. By 7:15, the room was packed. 23 people in designer suits, laptops open, coffee cooling in expensive mugs. Margaret recognized most of them. Thomas Brennan, the chief financial officer, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. Victoria Chen, head of international relations, known for her ruthless efficiency. David Porter, chief operations officer, whose voice could fill a room even when he whispered. And then there was Richard Crawford himself. At 61, Crawford looked like he'd been carved from marble and money. Silver hair swept back from a face that had graced the covers of Forbes and Time. His navy suit probably cost more than Margaret's rent for 6 months. He sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled beneath his chin, while the room buzzed with anxious energy. Margaret finished restocking the water bottles and moved toward the door, trying to be invisible. "We're looking at a $300 million deal," Victoria Chen was saying, her voice clipped and urgent. "Nakamura Industries wants confirmation on the manufacturing specs before noon Tokyo time. That's," she checked her watch, "in exactly 43 minutes. Our translator confirmed?" Crawford's voice was deep, authoritative, expecting compliance. Mark Sutton was supposed to be here 30 minutes ago. Thomas Brennan scrolled frantically through his phone. He's not answering. Get someone else. Sir, Sutton is our only Japanese interpreter. The backup is in London at a conference. We've called every translation service in the city. No one can get here in time. Crawford's jaw tightened, the first crack in his composed exterior. Then we reschedule. Nakamura-san was very clear. Victoria said carefully, "This call happens now or the deal goes to Hamburg Solutions." They've been circling this contract for months. The room fell silent. $300 million evaporating because of a language barrier. At 7:28 a.m., the phone in the center of the table rang. Everyone froze. Crawford nodded once and Victoria pressed the speaker button with a trembling hand. "Good evening, this is Kenji Nakamura." The voice was warm, polite, but underneath it lay the steel of a man who didn't waste time. He continued in rapid Japanese, words flowing like water over stones. The room stared at the phone as if it might sprout legs and walk away. Victoria leaned forward. "Mr. Nakamura, this is Victoria Chen. There's been a slight delay with our interpreter. If we could possibly, more Japanese, faster this time, insistent. He's asking for the manufacturing timeline." Someone whispered. "I think." "You think?" Crawford's voice could have cut steel. Another burst of Japanese, this time with an edge of impatience. Victoria tried again, her voice cracking slightly. "Mr. Nakamura, we sincerely apologize for..." The door opened. Margaret had meant to slip out unnoticed, but the cart's wheel caught on the carpet, making a small scraping sound. Every head turned toward her. She froze, one hand on the cart, wishing she could dissolve into the expensive wallpaper. "I'm sorry, I'll just..." "Not now," Brennan hissed. But Maya had followed her mother into the room, drawn by curiosity and that fearless innocence of childhood that hadn't yet learned to be afraid of powerful people. The girl stood in the doorway, her purple jacket a splash of color in a sea of grays and blacks, looking at the phone on the table with interest. From the speaker, Nakamura's voice grew sharper, clearly frustrated by the silence. And then Maya Hayes, 11 years old, daughter of a maid, wearing a 3-year-old thrift store jacket, did something that would change everything. She walked directly to the conference table and spoke, in perfect Japanese. "Nakamura-san, I deeply apologize for the confusion. This is Crawford Industries. We're experiencing a temporary technical difficulty, but we're fully prepared to discuss the manufacturing specifications you've requested. May I assist with translation?" The room didn't just go quiet. It went airless. 23 executives stared at a child who shouldn't be there, speaking a language she couldn't possibly know, addressing a billionaire Japanese industrialist with the formal politeness of a trained diplomat. Nakamura's response came through, surprised but pleased. Maya listened, nodding slightly, then turned to face the table. Her eyes found Richard Crawford, and for 3 long seconds the most powerful man in the room and a girl from the Bronx held each other's gaze. Then Maya spoke, her voice steady and clear. "Mr. Nakamura says he appreciates your company's reputation for excellence, and he's ready to begin. He'd like to start with the timeline for the semiconductor manufacturing process. He needs confirmation that you can meet the March delivery deadline." No one moved. No one breathed. And then Richard Crawford did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He stood up from his chair for someone other than another billionaire or head of state. He looked at this child, this impossible child, and asked the only question that mattered. "Who taught you that?" Maya Hayes stood perfectly still, in the center of Crawford Industries' most important conference room. 23 pairs of eyes fixed on her like lasers. The question hung in the air between her and Richard Crawford, heavy with implications neither of them fully understood yet. "Who taught you that?" Margaret felt her legs go weak. She reached for the cleaning cart to steady herself, her mind racing through 1,000 terrible scenarios. They would think Maya had stolen something, learned something she shouldn't have. They would call security. They would ban her from the building. Worse, they might call child services, claim Margaret was an unfit mother for bringing her daughter to work. But Maya didn't flinch. She looked directly at Crawford with those unsettlingly intelligent eyes and answered in a voice that didn't waver. "I taught myself, sir, from library books, online courses, and podcasts." She paused, then added with careful politeness, "Duolingo helped with the basics, but most of the business terminology came from MIT's OpenCourseware. Their international business program has excellent resources." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas Brennan's mouth had fallen open. Victoria Chen looked like she'd been slapped. David Porter actually removed his glasses to clean them, as if the problem was his vision and not reality itself. From the phone, Nakamura's voice cut through the shock, speaking in Japanese again. Maya's attention immediately shifted back to the call, her posture straightening. "Yes, Nakamura-san. I'm here." She listened carefully, then turned to address the table. "He says he's very impressed by Crawford Industries' commitment to excellence, even in unexpected ways. But he's on a tight schedule and would like to proceed with the technical specifications." Crawford stared at her for another long moment, his mind clearly working through calculations that had nothing to do with business deals. Then he made a decision that would have been unthinkable 5 minutes earlier. "Victoria, give her the specs." "Sir?" Victoria Chen looked like he'd asked her to set herself on fire. "The manufacturing timeline, the delivery schedules, everything Nakamura needs to hear." Crawford's voice carried absolute authority. "Give it to her and she'll translate." "Mr. Crawford, with all due respect, this is a $300 million deal. We can't possibly. We don't have a choice." His eyes never left Maya. "Do we?" Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she slid a leather portfolio across the table toward Maya. The girl picked it up with both hands, opened it, and began scanning the documents inside. Her eyes moved rapidly across the pages, absorbing information that had taken teams of engineers months to compile. Margaret wanted to run to her daughter, pull her away from this madness, protect her from these people who could crush them both without a second thought. But her feet wouldn't move. She stood frozen by the door, gripping the cart handle so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Maya began to speak, switching seamlessly between English and Japanese, her voice carrying the technical details with a precision that made the executives lean forward despite themselves. "Nakamura-san, regarding the semiconductor manufacturing process, Crawford Industries proposes a 4-phase timeline. Phase 1 involves the procurement of silicon wafers from your Tokyo facility, with quality control checkpoints every 72 hours. She continued, translating complex technical specifications, financial projections, and delivery schedules with the fluency of someone who'd been doing this for years. When Nakamura asked questions, she listened carefully, then turned to the executives for answers. "He wants to know about the contingency plan if there are shipping delays from the Taiwan suppliers." David Porter, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Tell him we've established backup relationships with 3 alternative suppliers in South Korea and Singapore. No single point of failure in the supply chain." Maya translated flawlessly, adding the formal business courtesies that Japanese negotiations required. The conversation flowed for 27 minutes, each exchange bringing the deal closer to completion. Finally, Nakamura spoke what sounded like a concluding statement. Maya's face remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Satisfaction, maybe, or relief. "Nakamura-san says he's very pleased with Crawford Industries' thorough preparation and professionalism. He's prepared to move forward with the contract. His legal team will send the preliminary documents by end of business today, Tokyo time." The room erupted, not in celebration but in released tension. Executives sagged in their chairs, exchanged glances that mixed disbelief with something like awe. "Please extend our deepest gratitude to Nakamura-san," Crawford said, his eyes still locked on Maya. "Tell him we look forward to a long and prosperous partnership." Maya delivered the message with perfect formal politeness, listened to Nakamura's warm response, and then said goodbye using the appropriate level of respectful Japanese that made Victoria Chen's eyebrows rise even higher. The call ended with a soft click. For 5 seconds, no one spoke. Then Thomas Brennan started to laugh. Not mockery, but the kind of desperate, disbelieving laughter that comes from surviving something that should have destroyed you. "Did that just happen?" he said to no one in particular. "Did we just close a $300 million deal with an 11-year-old translator? She's 11? Victoria's voice had gone up an octave. Maya carefully closed the leather portfolio and set it back on the table. "I'm sorry if I overstepped, sir. My mother always says I should mind my own business, but I heard you were having trouble, and I thought I might be able to help." Margaret found her voice thin and terrified. "Mr. Crawford, I'm so sorry. She shouldn't have. I didn't know she would. Please don't fire me. I need this job. I'll make sure she never—" "Margaret." Crawford's voice cut through her panic like a knife. He turned to face her fully for what might have been the first time in 8 years. "That's your name, correct, Margaret Hayes?" "Yes, sir." Her voice barely qualified as a whisper. "And this is your daughter?" "Yes, sir, Maya. She's a good girl. Smart. Too smart sometimes. But she means well. She won't cause any more trouble. I promise." Crawford walked slowly around the conference table, his expensive shoes silent on the carpet. He stopped in front of Maya, looking down at her with an expression that Margaret couldn't quite read. "How many languages do you speak, Maya?" The girl glanced at her mother, seeking permission. Margaret nodded, too terrified to do anything else. "Japanese, Spanish, Mandarin Chinese, and I'm working on Korean," Maya said simply. "Plus English, obviously." Obviously. Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Crawford's mouth. "And you learned all of this yourself? No tutors? No special programs? Books, mostly. The New York Public Library has an amazing collection. And the internet, when we can afford it." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity or shame. "Mom works a lot, so I have time to study." Crawford turned to Margaret, and she saw something in his eyes that she'd never seen directed at her before. Interest. Not the casual dismissal of a boss toward an employee, but genuine, focused curiosity. "How long have you worked here, Margaret?" 8 years, sir. Cleaning crew, night shift usually, but I took the early shift today because—" She stopped, realizing he probably didn't care about her scheduling conflicts. "And in 8 years, did you ever mention that your daughter was a linguistic prodigy?" No, sir. It's not, she's just—" Margaret struggled to find words. How could she explain that in her world you didn't advertise your children's talents to wealthy white people? That history had taught black mothers to hide their children's brightness, to make them small and invisible because visibility could be dangerous. "She's just what?" Crawford pressed. "She's just trying to learn things," Margaret finally said. "To make something of herself, to have opportunities I never had." The room had gone silent again, but this time the quality of the silence was different. The executives were watching this exchange with fascination, like spectators at a tennis match where the ball had suddenly turned into a grenade. Crawford nodded slowly, then turned back to Maya. "Do you go to school?" "Yes, sir. PS 114 in the Bronx. I'm in 6th grade. What's your favorite subject?" "Mathematics. Though I wish they'd let me take the advanced courses, they say I'm too young." For the first time, a hint of frustration crept into her voice. "But I've already finished the calculus textbooks online. I'm working on differential equations now." Victoria Chen made a small choking sound. Crawford studied Maya for another long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something that made Margaret's heart nearly stop. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Jennifer, clear my schedule for the next hour." "Yes, everything. And call Jonathan Myers at Whitmore Academy. Tell him I need to speak with him immediately. Tell him it's about a student." He paused, glancing at Maya. "A very special student." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Maya, I'd like you and your mother to come with me to my office. We need to have a conversation about your future." Margaret's stomach dropped. "Mr. Crawford, please." "You're not in trouble, Margaret." His voice was firm but not unkind. "Neither of you. But what just happened in this room?" He gestured at the conference table, at the phone that had connected them to Tokyo, at the portfolio full of documents that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics for all Maya's classmates could understand them. That doesn't happen by accident. That kind of talent doesn't go unnoticed. Not anymore. He walked toward the door, clearly expecting them to follow. Maya looked up at her mother, those wise, too old eyes asking a silent question. Margaret felt the weight of 1,000 possible futures pressing down on her shoulders. She thought of all the times she'd warned Maya to be careful, to not draw attention, to remember that the world wasn't always kind to little black girls who stood out. But she also thought of Maya reading quantum mechanics textbooks in corporate lobbies, while her mother cleaned toilets. Of a brilliant mind being wasted in an underfunded school that couldn't see past her zip code. Margaret took her daughter's hand. "Okay," she whispered. They followed Richard Crawford out of the conference room, past the frozen executives, through the maze of glass and steel that made up the 53rd floor. Behind them, Margaret could hear the whispers starting, the frantic phone calls being made. The cleaning cart sat abandoned by the door, wheels still turned toward escape. But Margaret and Maya Hayes were walking in a different direction now, towards something terrifying and impossible and maybe, just maybe, wonderful. Richard Crawford's office occupied the entire northwest corner of the 54th floor, a space so vast it could have housed Margaret's entire apartment 3 times over. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, the city stretching out below like a circuit board of ambition and desperation. The morning sun broke through the retreating storm clouds, casting long shadows across furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. Margaret had cleaned this office hundreds of times, always after hours when Crawford was long gone. She knew the weight of his desk, solid mahogany, custom made in Italy. She knew which books on his shelves were actually read and which were just for show. She knew that he kept a photograph of his late wife on the credenza, facing away from visitors, a private grief he didn't share with the world. But she'd never stood in this room while he was in it, never sat in one of the leather chairs he now gestured toward, never been anything but invisible here. "Please sit." Crawford moved behind his desk but didn't sit himself, instead standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Coffee? Water?" "We're fine, thank you, sir." Margaret's voice came out smaller than she intended. She perched on the edge of the chair, pulling Maya close beside her. The girl's purple jacket looked even more worn in this pristine environment, a splash of poverty and a temple of wealth. Crawford turned to face them, and Margaret noticed something she'd never seen before: uncertainty. This man who commanded boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals looked almost uncomfortable, as if he'd suddenly found himself in unfamiliar territory. "I'm going to be direct," he said finally. "What I witnessed in that conference room was extraordinary. Not just the language ability, though that alone would be remarkable, but the poise, the business acumen, the way Maya handled a high-pressure situation that's made grown men with MBAs break down in tears." He paused. How is this possible? Margaret felt Maya shift beside her, preparing to answer, but she squeezed her daughter's hand gently. This question wasn't really for Maya. It was for her. "She's always been like this, sir. Even as a baby, she was different. Walking at 9 months, reading at 3 years old. Her father," Margaret's voice caught. She hadn't spoken about David in years. Not to strangers, not to anyone who mattered. He was brilliant too. Electrical engineer. Self-taught. Like Maya. He died when she was 3. Construction accident. Crawford nodded slowly, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry. We managed. I work. Maya studies. That's how it's been." Margaret straightened her spine, finding some steel in herself she'd forgotten existed. She's never had tutors or special programs or any of the advantages other kids get. Everything she knows she learned because she wanted to, because she's hungry for it in a way I've never seen. "Mom works 2 jobs, Maya added quietly. "Sometimes 3. I don't want her to have to do that forever. So I study. I learn things that might help me get scholarships, get into good colleges, make enough money that she can rest." The simplicity of it, a child trying to save her mother, hung in the air like a prayer. Crawford's jaw tightened. He turned back to the window, silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge Margaret couldn't quite identify. "I built this company from nothing. My father was a mechanic in Detroit. My mother cleaned houses." He stopped, glancing at Margaret with something that might have been recognition or shame or both. "I know what it's like to be hungry. Not for food, though we had plenty of nights with empty cupboards, but hungry for more. For a chance to prove that where you start doesn't determine where you finish." He moved to his desk, pressed a button on his phone. "Jennifer, is Jonathan Myers on the line?" "Yes, sir. Holding for you." Crawford hit the speaker button. "Jonathan, Richard." The voice that came through was smooth, cultured, with the confidence of old money and older connections. "Your assistant said this was urgent. What can I do for you?" "I'm sitting here with an 11-year-old girl who just saved a $300 million deal by translating a business negotiation from Japanese. She speaks 4 languages fluently. She's teaching herself advanced mathematics, and she's currently stuck in an underfunded public school in the Bronx that has no idea what to do with her." Silence from the speaker. Then, "You're joking." "I don't joke about talent, Jonathan, you know that. 4 languages at 11. Self-taught. From library books and free online courses." Crawford's eyes found Maya. "Tell him what you're reading right now." Maya glanced at her mother, who nodded. "I'm working through Introduction to Quantum Mechanics by David Griffiths, and I'm reading The Tale of Genji in the original Japanese, though the classical grammar is challenging." Another silence, longer this time. "Richard," Jonathan Myers said carefully, "Whitmore Academy has a waiting list 3 years long. We have applications from senators' children, from royalty, from families who've been on that list since before their children were born. I'm not asking you to bump someone off the list, Jonathan. I'm asking you to do what Whitmore was founded to do. Find exceptional students regardless of their circumstances and give them the tools to change the world." Crawford's voice hardened. Or has the Academy forgotten that mission in favor of just educating the children of people who can afford the $100,000 annual tuition? Margaret's breath caught. $100,000 per year. More than she made in 3 years combined. "That's not fair, Richard." "Isn't it?" When was the last time Whitmore accepted a scholarship student from the Bronx? When was the last time you looked past zip codes and bank accounts to find real genius? We have scholarship programs that require applications submitted 2 years in advance with letters of recommendation from educators who can barely keep their own schools funded, and interviews that assume parents can take time off work to drive to Connecticut for a campus visit. Crawford's words cut like scalpels. You build walls and call them standards, Jonathan. I'm asking you to open a door. The silence stretched so long that Margaret wondered if Myers had hung up. I'd need to meet her, he finally said. Evaluate her myself. If she's truly as exceptional as you say, she is, then we'll find a place for her, full scholarship. But Richard, I need you to understand something. Whitmore isn't just academically rigorous, it's socially complex. The students there come from a different world. If this girl isn't prepared for that, her name is Maya Hayes, Crawford interrupted. And if your students aren't prepared for her, that's their problem, not hers. He ended the call without waiting for a response. Margaret realized she'd been holding her breath. She released it slowly, her mind spinning. Whitmore Academy. She'd heard of it, of course. Everyone had. It was where presidents sent their children, where tech billionaires and Hollywood royalty prepared the next generation to inherit their empires. It was as far from PS 114 as the moon was from the Bronx. Mr. Crawford, she began, her voice shaking. We can't possibly afford full scholarship, room, board, books, everything. He looked directly at her. I'll establish an endowment to cover it. She won't owe anything. Why? The question burst from Margaret before she could stop it. Why would you do this? You don't know us, you don't know her. What do you get out of this? Crawford was quiet for a moment, his expression difficult to read. 15 years ago, I was invited to speak at a high school in Brooklyn. Rough neighborhood, underfunded school, kids who'd been written off by everyone. I almost canceled. My assistant said it wasn't worth my time. He paused, his jaw working. But I went. And in that audience was a young man who asked me a question that changed how I thought about business, about ethics, about responsibility. He was brilliant, seeing things from angles none of my Ivy League executives could manage. What happened to him? Maya asked softly. I don't know. I tried to find him afterward to offer help. Maybe an internship, but he'd already dropped out. Needed to work to support his family. The school counselor said he was probably working at a warehouse in Queens. Crawford's hands clenched into fists. I had the resources to help him. I had the connections, the money, the power to change that young man's trajectory. But I didn't act fast enough. I let bureaucracy and proper channels and reasonable timelines get in the way, and I lost him. He turned back to Margaret and Maya, and there was something raw in his expression now, something that looked almost like pain. I won't make that mistake twice. Maya has a gift that the world needs, and the world has a way of crushing gifts when they come in packages it doesn't expect or value. He gestured at Maya, at her worn jacket, at her mother's cleaning uniform. I can't change society. I can't fix systemic inequality with a phone call, but I can open one door. I can give one brilliant child the tools she needs to reach her potential, and maybe, just maybe, she'll open doors for others behind her. Oh. Margaret felt tears burning behind her eyes. She'd spent 11 years fighting for Maya, scrubbing floors and working double shifts and sacrificing everything so her daughter could have books and internet access and a chance at something better. And now this man, this billionaire who'd never noticed her in 8 years, was offering to change everything with a single decision. It felt too easy, too impossible, too good to be true. What's the catch? She whispered. Crawford smiled, and it was the saddest smile Margaret had ever seen. The catch is that your daughter will enter a world that will judge her before she opens her mouth. She'll be the only black student in most of her classes. She'll face assumptions and prejudices and obstacles that the other students will never encounter. She'll have to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. He looked at Maya. It won't be fair. It won't be easy. And there will be days when you'll want to quit, when you'll wonder if it's worth it. Will it be? Maya asked, her voice steady. Worth it? Crawford considered this. That depends on what you want from life. If you want comfort, safety, and easier path, then no, probably not. Whitmore will challenge you in ways you can't imagine. But if you want to change things, to be part of something bigger than yourself, to use your gifts to make the world different, he paused. Then yes, it will be worth every difficult day. Maya looked up at her mother, those wise eyes asking the question she couldn't voice. What do we do? Margaret thought about David, about the dreams he'd had for their daughter before the scaffolding collapsed and took him away. She thought about every time Maya had taught herself something new, hungry for knowledge the way other kids were hungry for candy. She thought about the look on her daughter's face when she'd translated that call, the confidence and capability that had seemed to bloom from nowhere but had actually been growing in shadows for years, waiting for light. She thought about staying invisible, staying safe, staying small, and then she thought about the alternative. And when does school start? Margaret asked. Crawford's expression shifted. Surprise, respect, something almost like relief. Myers will want to meet her next week. Run some assessments, make it official. If all goes well, she could start after Thanksgiving break. That's only 3 weeks away, Margaret breathed. Is that a problem? Margaret looked at her daughter, at this impossible, brilliant child who'd been born into circumstances that should have limited her, but had somehow created something extraordinary instead. No, she said finally. That's not a problem. Maya squeezed her mother's hand and Margaret squeezed back, and in that moment they both understood that everything was about to change. Crawford moved to his desk, pulled out a business card and handed it to Margaret. This is my direct line. If you need anything, and I mean anything, for Maya's transition, you call me. Transportation, clothes, supplies, whatever. Don't hesitate. Margaret took the card with trembling fingers, Richard Crawford's private number, in her hand. A week ago, she wouldn't have dreamed such a thing existed. Thank you, sir, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. Crawford's expression grew serious. Thank me when Maya graduates at the top of her class and goes on to do things that make my accomplishments look small. That's when I'll know this was the right decision. He walked them to the door, and as they stepped into the hallway, Margaret heard him say one more thing. She's going to change everything, Margaret. Your daughter is going to change everything. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Mother and daughter stood in the hallway, surrounded by glass and steel and possibility. And for the first time in 8 years, Margaret Hayes felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel: hope. The next 7 days moved like a fever dream. Margaret had expected resistance. From the school, from Whitmore Academy, from the universe itself, which in her experience didn't hand out miracles to black women from the Bronx. But Crawford's influence moved through bureaucratic channels like a hot knife through butter, cutting through red tape that would have strangled anyone else. On Wednesday, Jonathan Myers arrived at Crawford Industries in a Tesla that probably cost more than Margaret's entire apartment building. He was exactly what she'd imagined. Late 50s, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a cashmere coat that whispered old money with every movement. He looked at Maya the way a jeweler might examine a stone, skeptical until proven otherwise, but willing to be convinced. The evaluation took 4 hours. Margaret sat in a waiting room on the 53rd floor, her hands clasped so tightly her fingers went numb. Through the glass walls, she could see other employees going about their business, but everything felt distant, unreal. Sharon Mitchells had walked past twice, her expression a mix of confusion and something that looked suspiciously like resentment. Your daughter's in a meeting with the Whitmore headmaster? Sharon had finally asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Yes, ma'am. The same daughter who was here last week during the Tokyo call? Yes, ma'am. Sharon had opened her mouth, closed it, then walked away, shaking her head. When Myers finally emerged from the conference room, his expression was carefully neutral. Maya followed behind him, looking tired but composed. The girl caught her mother's eye and gave a tiny nod. Mrs. Hayes. Myers extended his hand, and Margaret shook it, feeling the softness of someone who'd never done manual labor. Your daughter is remarkable, truly exceptional. In 23 years as headmaster of Whitmore Academy, I've never encountered a student quite like her. Margaret's heart hammered. Is that good? It's extraordinary. He pulled out a folder, opened it to reveal pages dense with numbers and charts. Maya tested at the 99th percentile in verbal reasoning, mathematical aptitude, and spatial intelligence. Her language proficiency assessments placed her at near-native fluency in Japanese and Mandarin, skills that typically take a decade of formal instruction to achieve. And her scores on the logic and critical thinking sections. He paused, looking at Maya with something approaching awe. She scored higher than I did, Mrs. Hayes, and I have a PhD from Princeton. So she can attend? Margaret hardly dared to hope. She can attend. More than that, I'm recommending her for our Advanced Scholars track, a program we typically reserve for 10th graders. Maya will have access to college-level courses, independent study opportunities, and mentorship from professors at Yale and MIT. He closed the folder. Mr. Crawford has established a full endowment for her education, covering everything through graduation. If she maintains her current trajectory, she'll have her choice of any university in the world. The words washed over Margaret like a wave. too big to fully comprehend. Any university in the world. Her daughter, who'd learned Japanese from library books and YouTube videos, could go anywhere, do anything. When does she start? Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Monday after Thanksgiving. That gives us time to process the paperwork and get her settled in the dormitory. Dormitory? Margaret's stomach dropped. She has to live there? Myers looked surprised. Well, yes. Whitmore is a boarding school. Students live on campus during the academic term. It's part of what makes our program so intensive, the complete immersion in academic culture. Margaret turned to Maya, seeing her own panic reflected in her daughter's eyes. They'd never been apart for more than a day, never slept in different buildings, different zip codes, different worlds. How often can she come home? Margaret asked. Weekends, holidays, and 3 extended breaks throughout the year. Many students choose to stay on campus during weekends to take advantage of study groups and extracurricular activities, but Maya would be welcome to return home whenever she wishes. Myers softened slightly. Mrs. Hayes, I understand this is difficult, but Whitmore isn't just about academics. It's about building independence, resilience, and the social skills necessary to navigate elite spaces. Maya needs to learn how to exist in that world, not just visit it. Margaret understood what he was really saying. Her daughter needed to learn how to be around rich white people without her mother there to protect her. The thought made her chest tight, but Maya squeezed her hand. It's okay, Mama. We knew this would be different. Different. Such a small word for such an enormous change. The following days blurred together in a chaos of preparation. Crawford had assigned Victoria Chen to help with the logistics, and the woman approached the task with the same ruthless efficiency she brought to international business deals. Maya needed uniforms, purchased, school supplies, ordered, a laptop and tablet for coursework, delivered, winter clothes appropriate for Connecticut weather, acquired. Margaret watched boxes arrive at their tiny apartment, each one containing items that cost more than she made in a week. Cashmere sweaters, a wool coat with a designer label she recognized from magazines, leather shoes that actually fit properly instead of being 2 sizes too big from the thrift store. This is too much, Margaret said on Friday evening, standing in their living room surrounded by shopping bags. She doesn't need all this. Victoria looked up from her tablet, her expression patient but firm. With respect, Mrs. Hayes, she does. Whitmore students come from families where these items are standard. Maya needs to fit in, not stand out. She'll face enough challenges without being marked as different by her clothing. She is different. Margaret's voice came out sharper than intended. She's a black girl from the Bronx in a school full of rich white kids. No amount of cashmere is going to change that. You're right, it won't change it. Victoria set down her tablet. But it might make it slightly easier. Give her one less thing to worry about while she's fighting all the other battles she'll face. Margaret sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. What if I'm making a mistake? What if she's not ready? What if they eat her alive in that place? Victoria was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried an unexpected gentleness. My parents immigrated from Taiwan when I was 7. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Flushing, Queens. My father worked at a restaurant, my mother sewed clothes in a factory. When I got into Stuyvesant High School, they were terrified. They thought I'd lose my culture, forget my language, become someone they didn't recognize. Did you? Margaret asked. In some ways, yes. I learned how to code switch, how to move between worlds. I became fluent in the language of boardrooms and power. She paused. But I never forgot where I came from, and neither will Maya. The question isn't whether she'll change. She will. The question is whether she'll use that change to lift herself up while pulling others behind her, or whether she'll assimilate completely and forget the people she left behind. And how do I make sure she chooses the right path? Victoria smiled. You've already done the hardest part, Mrs. Hayes. You raised a daughter who translates for billion-dollar deals not to show off, but because she saw people who needed help and she had the tools to help them. That character doesn't disappear because she moves to Connecticut. On Saturday, Maya's last full day before Thanksgiving break and the start of her new life, Margaret took her daughter to visit David's grave. They took the train to Woodlawn Cemetery, walking through rows of weathered headstones under a gray November sky. David's plot was simple. They couldn't afford anything elaborate, but Margaret kept it clean, brought flowers when she could. Maya knelt in front of the stone, tracing her father's name with one finger. I wish he could see you now, Margaret said softly. He'd be so proud. Tell me about him again, Maya requested, about how he taught himself engineering. Margaret settled onto the grass beside her daughter. not caring about the cold seeping through her jeans. He was working construction, just basic labor, when he noticed the electrical systems weren't installed right on one of the buildings. He went to the foreman, explained the problem, showed calculations he'd done in a notebook he carried everywhere. They promoted him on the spot. And he never went to college? Couldn't afford it, but he didn't need it. He had something better, curiosity and determination and the kind of mind that could see solutions other people missed. Margaret touched Maya's shoulder. Like you. I'm scared, Mama. It was the first time Maya had admitted it out loud. What if I go there and I'm not smart enough? What if everyone else is better than me? Margaret pulled her daughter close. Baby, listen to me. You are going to walk into that school and some people are going to underestimate you because of how you look or where you're from. Let them. Because when you open your mouth and show them what you can do, their assumptions will shatter like glass. You've already proven you can handle pressure. You saved a $300 million deal while grown men with fancy degrees stood around panicking. Whitmore Academy doesn't scare me. You know why? Why? Because they have no idea what's about to hit them. Maya laughed, a small sound that was half sob, and Margaret held her daughter while the wind moved through the cemetery trees, carrying away the last of autumn's leaves. On Monday morning, Richard Crawford sent a car, not a company car, but his personal vehicle, a black Mercedes with a driver who helped load Maya's new luggage with careful respect. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk to watch, whispering behind their hands. Margaret could imagine what they were saying. Who does she think she is? Acting like she's better than everyone else. Letting that girl get ideas above her station. But Mrs. Chen from the corner apartment came out with a bag of homemade dumplings. For the journey, she said, pressing them into Maya's hands. Study hard. Make us proud. Mr. Johnson from the 4th floor gave Maya a worn copy of Toni Morrison's Beloved. Don't forget where you come from, young sister. And don't let them convince you that their world is better, just different. Even Isaiah, the teenager from 3B who dropped out of high school last year, stopped to fist bump Maya. You're gonna do big things, little genius, bigger than this place. Just remember us when you're running the world, yeah? Maya hugged each of them, her eyes bright with tears, and Margaret realized that her daughter wasn't just leaving for school. She was leaving behind a community that had watched her grow, that had shared books and internet passwords and encouragement when resources were scarce. She was leaving behind people who understood struggle in ways that Whitmore students never would. The ride to Connecticut took 2 hours. Margaret held Maya's hand the entire time, watching the city give way to suburbs, then to the kind of pastoral landscape that existed in movies but never felt quite real. Trees lined the roads like sentinels. Houses sat on acres of land, each one bigger than the entire building Margaret lived in. And then, finally, they turned through iron gates bearing the Whitmore Academy crest. The campus was stunning. Brick buildings with ivy-covered walls, perfectly manicured lawns, students in navy blazers moving between classes with the easy confidence of people who'd never questioned their right to be there. A chapel spire rose against the November sky. Tennis courts and athletic fields stretched toward distant woods. It looked like a painting of privilege. Maya's hand tightened in her mother's. You've got this, Margaret whispered. Remember, you're not here to fit in. You're here to excel. There's a difference. They parked in front of a building marked Student Services, where Jonathan Myers waited with a woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Patricia Whitmore. No relation to the school's founder, she clarified with a rehearsed smile. She would be Maya's faculty advisor and dorm parent. Mrs. Whitmore was kind in that careful, professional way that made it clear she'd been trained in diversity and inclusion, but had probably never actually been diverse or included anywhere. She led them through the registration process, handed Maya a schedule dense with courses that sounded intimidating: advanced placement calculus, classical literature, molecular biology, international relations. Your first class is at 8 a.m. tomorrow, Mrs. Whitmore explained. Mr. Crawford has asked that we place you in our most challenging track to properly assess your abilities. If the coursework proves too difficult, we can always adjust. Margaret heard the unspoken assumption. You'll need to adjust. You're not really ready for this. But Maya just nodded, her expression calm. I understand. They toured the dormitory, a beautiful old building with hardwood floors and tall windows, each room designed for 2 students. Maya's roommate hadn't arrived yet, but her side of the room was already decorated. Photos of ski trips and beach vacations, a collection of ribbons from equestrian competitions, expensive pillows monogrammed with initials that probably came with trust funds attached. Margaret helped Maya unpack, hanging up the new uniforms, organizing textbooks, trying to make this foreign space feel like home. But it was impossible. This room, this building, this entire world was designed for people who'd never questioned whether they belonged. "I should go," Margaret finally said, even though every instinct screamed at her to stay, to protect, to shield her daughter from whatever was coming. "Let you get settled before dinner." They walked back to the parking lot together, neither one speaking, both knowing that this goodbye carried more weight than usual. At the car, Maya finally broke. "What if I fail?" she whispered. "What if I disappoint everyone?" Margaret cupped her daughter's face in both hands. "Baby, you listen to me. The only way you could disappoint me is if you stopped being yourself. If you let this place make you ashamed of where you came from or who you are. Promise me, no matter what happens here, no matter how hard it gets, you stay Maya Hayes from the Bronx. You stay my daughter." "I promise, Mama." They held each other for a long moment, and Margaret breathed in the scent of her daughter's hair, trying to memorize everything about this moment before everything changed. Then she let go. She got into the Mercedes and watched through the rear window as Maya stood alone on the steps of Whitmore Academy, small in her new uniform, surrounded by privilege and possibility and danger. The car pulled away, and Margaret let herself cry, because she knew that the next time she saw her daughter, something fundamental would be different. The question was whether that difference would destroy Maya or forge her into something stronger. Only time would tell. 3 weeks later, Margaret's phone rang at 2:17 a.m. She jerked awake, heart hammering, already reaching for the device on her nightstand. Late-night calls never brought good news. Not in her world. "Hello?" Her voice came out rough with sleep and fear. "Mrs. Hayes?" The voice was unfamiliar. Female, young, nervous. "This is Stephanie Chen. I'm Maya's roommate at Whitmore. I'm sorry to call so late, but I thought you should know. Maya's not okay." Margaret was already out of bed, pulling on clothes with one hand while gripping the phone with the other. "What happened? Is she hurt?" "Not physically, but Mrs. Hayes. She hasn't left our room in 3 days except for classes. She doesn't eat in the dining hall anymore. I hear her crying at night when she thinks I'm asleep." Stephanie's voice dropped to a whisper. "Something happened last week and she won't talk about it, but it broke something in her." Margaret's hands shook as she laced her shoes. "I'm coming. Tell her I'm coming right now. Thank you. I didn't know if I should call, but she talks about you all the time. How strong you are. How you never give up. I think she needs you to remind her of that." The call ended. Margaret grabbed her coat and was out the door within 5 minutes, running through empty Bronx streets to the subway station. The first train wouldn't come for another hour, so she hailed a cab she couldn't afford and gave the driver the Whitmore Academy address. "Connecticut?" The driver turned to look at her. "Lady, that's gonna be over $200. "I don't care. Drive." The city blurred past the windows as they crossed the Triborough Bridge, darkness giving way to the purple gray of pre-dawn. Margaret's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Had someone hurt Maya? Called her names? Made her feel small in the way Margaret had feared from the beginning? They arrived at Whitmore just as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the brick buildings in shades of gold that felt like mockery. Margaret paid the driver with money she'd been saving for December rent, then marched to the dormitory entrance. A security guard stopped her. "Ma'am, visiting hours don't start until... My daughter is in there and she needs me. You can either let me in, or I will find another way." Margaret's voice carried the weight of every hard year she'd survived, every obstacle she'd overcome, every single time someone had told her no and she'd refused to accept it. Something in her expression made the guard step aside. She found Maya's room on the 3rd floor, knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for permission. The room was dark, curtains drawn against the morning light. Stephanie's side was neat and organized, but Maya's looked like a hurricane had passed through. Books scattered across the floor, clothes in piles, her bed unmade, and in the center of the chaos, curled up in her desk chair with her knees pulled to her chest, was her daughter. Maya looked up and Margaret's heart shattered. The bright, confident girl who'd translated for billionaires was gone. In her place sat someone who looked defeated, diminished, like a light had been systematically extinguished. "Mama?" Maya's voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" Margaret crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her daughter into her arms. "Your roommate called. Said you needed me. So I came." Maya broke then, sobbing into her mother's shoulder with the kind of raw, desperate crying that only comes when you've been holding everything in for too long. Margaret held her, rocking slightly. waiting for the storm to pass. When Maya finally pulled back, her eyes were red and swollen. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to worry you. I thought I could handle it." "Handle what, baby? Tell me what happened." Maya took a shaky breath. "It was in advanced calculus. We had a major exam, 30% of our grade. I studied for weeks, Mama. Every night, every free period. I knew that material inside and out." She wiped her eyes. "I got the highest score in the class, 98%. The next highest was 86. That's wonderful. Dr. Harrison called me to his office the next day." Maya's voice went flat, emotionless. "He said there had been concerns about academic integrity, that several students had reported suspicious behavior during the exam. He said my score was statistically anomalous given my background." Margaret felt ice forming in her veins. "What does that mean?" "It means he thinks I cheated, Mama. He didn't say it directly, but he made me retake the exam, right there in his office with him watching. Different questions, but same difficulty level." Maya's laugh was bitter, broken. "I got 99%, and you know what he said? He said perhaps he'd underestimated me, but that I should understand why my sudden excellence raised questions. That son of a... It gets worse." Maya's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "After that, it was like permission had been granted. Other students started questioning my work. In international relations, when I corrected Professor Mitchell's translation of a Japanese document, 3 students accused me of using translation apps. In molecular biology, my lab partner refused to work with me because she was afraid I'd steal her ideas and take credit for them." Margaret's hands clenched into fists. "Did you tell anyone, report this?" "To who?" "Mrs. Whitmore said I needed to develop thicker skin and understand that high achievement comes with scrutiny. Mr. Myers said that adjustment periods are difficult for scholarship students and I should focus on my studies, not social dynamics." Maya's eyes filled with tears again. "Nobody believes me, Mama. Or maybe they do believe me, but they don't care. Because in their minds, I don't belong here. I'm the charity case who got lucky, not the student who earned her place." Margaret stood up, pacing the small room, her mind working through options. She could pull Maya out, bring her home, forget this entire nightmare. But that would mean giving up, admitting defeat, letting those people win. Or she could fight. "Where's your phone?" Margaret asked. "On my desk." "Why?" Margaret picked it up, scrolled through contacts until she found what she needed and hit call. It rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "This is Crawford." "Mr. Crawford, this is Margaret Hayes. I'm at Whitmore Academy right now with my daughter, and I need you to do something for me." There was a pause, the sound of movement, sheets rustling. "Margaret, what time is it?" "Time for you to make good on your promise. You said Maya would face obstacles, but you also said she'd have support. So I'm calling in that support." Margaret's voice was steel. "I need you to get Jonathan Myers on a call in the next 30 minutes. And I need you to be on that call too, because we're going to have a conversation about what happens when your prestigious academy treats a brilliant black girl like a criminal for the crime of being excellent." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Give me 20 minutes. The call ended. Maya stared at her mother with wide eyes. "Mama, what did you just do?" "What I should have done the moment that roommate of yours called. I stopped being polite and started being a mother." Margaret sat back down, taking Maya's hands in hers. "Baby, listen to me. You are not going to let these people break you. You are not going to shrink yourself to make them comfortable. And you are definitely not going to apologize for being smarter than they expected. But what if they kick me out? Then we'll deal with that. But I'm not going to let them push you out quietly while pretending it's for your own good. If you leave Whitmore, it'll be because you chose to, not because they made it unbearable to stay." Stephanie appeared in the doorway, still in pajamas. "Is everything okay?" "It will be," Margaret said firmly. "Thank you for calling me. I should have called sooner. I didn't know if it was my place." Stephanie looked at Maya with genuine concern. "For what it's worth, Maya, everyone in our calculus class knows you didn't cheat. The people who reported you are just mad because you made them look bad." Maya managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Steph." Margaret's phone rang. "Crawford. Myers is on the line," he said without preamble. "Conference call. You're on speaker." "Mrs. Hayes." Myers' voice was cautious. "Richard tells me there's been a situation. I'd like to hear your perspective." Margaret stood up, squaring her shoulders even though they couldn't see her. "My perspective is that you sold me on Whitmore Academy being a place where exceptional students could thrive regardless of their background. But what I'm hearing is that my daughter has been accused of cheating. questioned about her abilities, and essentially told to accept that prejudice is the price of admission. So here's what's going to happen. Margaret's voice cut through the phone line like a blade, sharp and unwavering. Here's what's going to happen. First, Dr. Harrison is going to apologize to my daughter in front of the entire advanced calculus class for questioning her integrity without evidence. Second, you're going to implement a formal investigation into the students who filed false accusations against her. And third, you're going to establish a clear anti-discrimination policy that protects scholarship students from this exact kind of harassment. The silence on the other end was deafening. Mrs. Hayes, Myers finally said, his voice tight, I understand you're upset, but these are serious allegations that require careful what? Margaret interrupted. Careful consideration? Careful deliberation? While my daughter cries herself to sleep every night because your school treats her like a criminal for being excellent? No, we're done being careful. We're done being patient. My daughter earned her place at Whitmore by being extraordinary, and you're going to treat her that way, or Richard Crawford is going to withdraw his endowment and tell every major donor exactly why. Margaret, Crawford's voice held a warning, but also something else. Approval, maybe, or recognition. I mean it, Mr. Crawford. You said you wouldn't make the same mistake twice. You said you wouldn't let another brilliant kid slip through the cracks because of bureaucracy and politics. So prove it. Right now. Make them understand that Maya Hayes isn't just some charity case they can push around. She's the future you're supposed to be investing in. Another long silence. Then Myers spoke. His voice different now. Resigned maybe, or possibly relieved that someone had finally said what needed saying. You're right. The admission seemed to cost him. Mrs. Hayes, you're absolutely right. We've failed Maya, and we've failed the principles Whitmore was founded on. I'll speak with Dr. Harrison this morning. The students involved will face disciplinary action, and I'll personally oversee the implementation of new protections for all our students, regardless of their background. I want it in writing, Margaret said, and I want monthly reports on Maya's treatment. Any professor who questions her abilities without cause, any student who harasses her, any administrator who tells her to develop thicker skin, I want to know about it immediately. You have my word. Your word got us into this mess, Mr. Myers. I want accountability. Crawford's voice came through, and it carried a tone Margaret had never heard from him before. Something almost like pride. Jonathan, I'll be establishing an oversight committee for scholarship students. Margaret Hayes will be on that committee. She'll have direct access to student complaints and the authority to escalate issues to the Board of Trustees if necessary. Richard, that's highly irregular. So is accusing a child of cheating because she's smarter than you expected her to be. Irregular seems to be our theme this morning. Crawford's voice hardened. Jonathan, I've supported Whitmore for 15 years. I've donated millions to your endowment, funded your new science building, and recruited some of your best students for internships at Crawford Industries. I'm calling in those favors right now. Make this right, or I walk. And when I walk, I talk. The threat hung in the air like a guillotine blade. It will be done, Myers said quietly. Mrs. Hayes, Maya, you have my sincerest apologies. This should never have happened, and I'll make sure it never happens again. The call ended. Margaret set down the phone, her hands shaking with adrenaline and rage and something that felt dangerously close to triumph. She turned to find Maya staring at her with an expression of complete awe. Mama, you just threatened the headmaster of Whitmore Academy. I did. Margaret sat down heavily on the bed, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. You told Richard Crawford you'd make him withdraw his donation. He was going to do it anyway, I just gave him the excuse. Margaret reached out, cupping Maya's face in her hands. Baby, I need you to understand something. There are going to be people in this world who look at you and see only what they expect to see. A black girl who doesn't belong, who couldn't possibly be as smart as she appears, who must have gotten lucky or cheated or had help. And those people are wrong, but they're also powerful, and they're everywhere, and you can't fight every single battle alone. So what do? You prove them wrong. Every single day, you prove them so completely, so undeniably wrong, that they have no choice but to see you for who you really are. Margaret smiled. But when that's not enough, when they're too blind or too prejudiced or too comfortable in their assumptions, you call me. You call Mr. Crawford. You call everyone who believes in you. And you let us fight alongside you, because that's what family does. That's what allies do. Maya threw her arms around her mother, holding tight. I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby. More than anything in this world. They sat like that for a long moment, mother and daughter. Warrior and genius. Survivors both. A knock on the door interrupted them. Stephanie poked her head in, looking nervous. Maya? There's someone here to see you. A bunch of someones, actually." Margaret and Maya exchanged confused glances, then followed Stephanie into the hallway. What they found there made Maya stop in her tracks. At least 20 students crowded the corridor, some in pajamas, others already dressed for breakfast. But they were all holding something: notebooks, folders, textbooks. And they were all looking at Maya with expressions that ranged from sheepish to determined. A tall white boy with red hair stepped forward. He'd been in Maya's calculus class. She recognized him from the front row where he always sat, confident and vocal. "Maya, I'm Connor Hartley. I was one of the students who scored 86 on that exam, the one you beat by 12 points. He took a breath. I was angry. I'd studied for weeks, and you just showed up and made it look easy. So when Dr. Harrison asked if anyone had noticed anything unusual during the exam, I said maybe you'd been looking at notes. I didn't see you do it. I wanted to believe you had, because that would explain how you were better than me." He held out his hand, and Maya saw he was offering her his calculus textbook. "I'm sorry. What I did was wrong. It was racist and cruel, and you deserved better." He gestured at the book. "I was wondering if maybe you could help me understand the material better, because clearly you know something I don't." Maya stared at the textbook, then at Connor, then at the crowd of students behind him. A black girl with braids and a Whitmore Field hockey jersey stepped forward next. "I'm Jasmine Williams. I'm a senior, and I should have said something when I heard what was happening to you. I didn't because I was scared it would happen to me too. I'm also on scholarship, and I've learned to keep my head down. But that was cowardly, and I'm sorry. If you need anything, study groups, someone to eat lunch with, backup when professors get weird, I'm here." More students stepped forward one by one, offering apologies or support or simply acknowledgement. Not all of them. Maya could see some faces missing, students who'd been in her classes but weren't here now, who probably still believed she didn't belong. But enough to matter. Stephanie put her hand on Maya's shoulder. "You're not alone here, Maya. Some of us just needed to remember that being silent makes us complicit." Margaret watched her daughter's face transform, the defeat melting away, replaced by something stronger. Not quite happiness, not yet, but hope, resilience, the understanding that even in hostile territory, allies could be found. "Thank you," Maya said softly. "All of you, thank you." 3 months later, Margaret stood in the back of Whitmore Academy's assembly hall, watching her daughter accept an award for academic excellence. Maya had maintained perfect scores across all her classes, despite the scrutiny, despite the pressure, despite everything. But more than that, she'd helped establish the Whitmore Scholarship Student Alliance, a support network for students from underprivileged backgrounds, complete with mentorship programs, bias reporting systems, and monthly meetings with administration to address concerns. Jasmine Williams was the president. Maya was vice president. Connor Hartley, surprisingly, had become their most vocal ally, using his privilege and family connections to amplify their message. Richard Crawford sat in the front row, and Margaret had taken a seat near him at his invitation. She still cleaned his offices 3 nights a week. She'd refused to quit despite his offers of alternative positions that paid better, but felt like charity. This way, she earned her money and maintained her dignity. But their relationship had shifted. He knew her name now, asked about Maya, listened when Margaret talked about the challenges still facing scholarship students. "She's going to change the world," Crawford said as Maya returned to her seat, the award gleaming in her hands. "You know that, right?" "She already has," Margaret replied. "She changed mine." On stage, Jonathan Myers was introducing the next speaker, a representative from MIT who wanted to discuss their early admission program for exceptional students. Maya's name was mentioned. Several heads turned to look at her, and this time, the expressions were different. Respect, recognition, maybe even a little awe. After the assembly, Maya found her mother in the crowd. She'd grown taller in 3 months, more confident in the way she carried herself. The purple thrift store jacket was gone, replaced by a proper winter coat, but she'd kept the jacket folded in her closet. A reminder she'd told Margaret of where she started. "MIT wants to interview me next month," Maya said, her eyes bright, "for their summer research program. If I get in, I'd be the youngest student they've ever accepted." "You'll get in," Margaret said with certainty. "How do you know?" "Because you're Maya Hayes. Because you learned 4 languages from library books. because you saved a $300 million business deal, because you survived Whitmore Academy's attempt to break you and came out stronger. Margaret touched her daughter's cheek. Because you're your father's daughter, and my daughter, and we don't quit. Maya hugged her mother, and Margaret breathed in the moment. Her brilliant, impossible, extraordinary daughter, standing in a world that had tried to exclude her and had failed. 5 years later, Maya Hayes graduated from MIT with a dual degree in computer science and international relations. She was 19 years old. 7 years later, she founded her own company, a translation and AI platform designed to break down language barriers in international business, with a special focus on supporting minority-owned businesses in global markets. Crawford Industries was her first major client. Her first major hire was Jasmine Williams as Chief Operating Officer. 10 years later, Maya Hayes appeared on the cover of Forbes magazine as one of the 30 under 30 most influential entrepreneurs in technology. The article mentioned her background: daughter of a maid, scholarship student at Whitmore Academy, self-taught polyglot who'd learned Japanese from library books. But the headline read, Maya Hayes, the genius who refused to be invisible. Margaret framed that magazine cover and hung it in the living room of the house Maya had bought her, a small place in a better neighborhood, nothing fancy, but with a yard and enough space for Margaret to finally stop working 3 jobs. She'd retired from Crawford Industries at 55, with a pension Crawford had discovered she was eligible for, and a retirement party attended by executives who'd once walked past her without a second glance. On the wall beside the Forbes cover hung another frame, a photograph from that first day at Whitmore, Maya in her new uniform, standing on those imposing steps, looking small and scared and determined all at once. And next to that, a quote Maya had written in her college admission essay, words that had made Margaret cry when she first read them. My mother taught me that invisibility is not the absence of presence, it's the failure of others to see what's right in front of them. She taught me that excellence is the best revenge, and she taught me that the world doesn't give opportunities to people like us. We take them. Margaret stood in her living room, looking at those frames, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. She thought about that October morning when Maya had walked into a conference room and changed everything, about the fear and the fighting and the small victories that had built into something bigger than either of them could have imagined. Her phone rang. Maya calling from San Francisco, where her company was headquartered. Hey Mama, just wanted to let you know, I'm flying home next week. I'm giving a talk at PS 114. Margaret's heart swelled. Your old elementary school? Yeah, they're starting a mentorship program for gifted students from low-income families. They asked if I'd speak at the launch event, maybe inspire some kids. Maya's voice carried a smile. I thought I'd tell them about a girl who learned Japanese from library books and ended up translating for billionaires. Think they'll like that story? I think they'll love it, Margaret said. I think they need it. Will you come with me? I want them to meet you too. Want them to understand that behind every genius kid is usually a parent working 3 jobs to keep the lights on and the library cards active. Margaret looked at the photographs on her wall, at the evidence of impossible things made possible, of invisible women made visible, of a system that tried to crush them and failed. I'll be there, baby. I wouldn't miss it for the world. They talked for a few more minutes about business and family and plans for the holidays. When the call ended, Margaret sat down in her favorite chair, the one luxury she'd allowed herself, a comfortable recliner where she could read in the evenings, and picked up the book on her side table. It was Maya's book, actually, a memoir she'd published last year, Invisible No More, How One Girl's Genius Changed a Billionaire's Mind and Her Own Future. The dedication page read, For Mama, who taught me that being underestimated is a gift. It means they'll never see you coming. Margaret smiled, closed the book, and looked out the window at the street below. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, 5 years almost to the day from when everything had changed. Somewhere in Manhattan, Richard Crawford was probably in his office, making billion-dollar decisions, surrounded by executives who hung on his every word. But Margaret knew something those executives didn't, that the most important decision Crawford had ever made hadn't been about money or markets or mergers. It had been about seeing someone who'd been invisible, about recognizing genius in a worn purple jacket, about understanding that talent doesn't care about zip codes or bank accounts or the color of someone's skin. And it had been about a black maid named Margaret Hayes, who'd raised a daughter to believe that being excellent wasn't arrogant, it was necessary, that taking up space wasn't rude, it was revolutionary. That refusing to be invisible wasn't selfish, it was survival. Margaret had spent 8 years cleaning Richard Crawford's office, and in all that time he'd never truly seen her. But he'd seen Maya, and Maya had made sure that afterward, he could never look at people like Margaret the same way again. That was the real genius, Margaret thought. Not just the languages or the test scores or the business success, but the way Maya had taken her opportunities and turned them into doors for others. The way she'd refused to forget where she came from even as she soared beyond it. The way she'd used her visibility to shine light on people still waiting in the shadows. Margaret's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Maya, sent to a group chat that included Jasmine, Stephanie, Connor, and a dozen other Whitmore alumni who'd become Maya's closest friends and fiercest advocates. The message read, "Just closed a deal to fund scholarship programs at 50 underserved schools, starting with PS 114, because every kid deserves a chance to be seen." Responses flooded in. Congratulations, emojis, promises of support. Margaret added her own message, "Proud of you, baby. Your father would be too." She set down the phone and returned to the window, watching the world go by. Somewhere in that world there was another Maya Hayes, another brilliant child being overlooked, underestimated, made invisible by a society that couldn't see past its own assumptions. But maybe, thanks to Maya's programs and scholarships and advocacy, that child would have a slightly easier path. Maybe their genius wouldn't have to wait until a desperate business meeting to be recognized. Maybe they'd get their chance earlier, sooner, with less fighting required. That was the dream anyway. Margaret closed her eyes and let herself imagine it. A world where black girls from the Bronx didn't have to be twice as good to be seen as half as competent. Where self-taught genius was celebrated instead of questioned. Where Maid's daughters could become CEOs without having to prove their worth 1,000 times over. It wasn't that world yet, but it was closer than it had been. And that, Margaret thought, was something worth fighting for. The phone rang again. This time it was Richard Crawford. "Margaret, I have a proposition for you." She smiled. "I'm listening." Maya's programs are expanding faster than her team can manage. She needs someone who understands both where these kids are coming from and how to navigate institutional barriers. Someone who's not afraid to make uncomfortable phone calls at 2 in the morning. Someone who knows how to fight for children who need advocates. "What are you saying, Mr. Crawford?" "I'm saying Maya wants to hire you as Director of Community Outreach for her foundation. Full salary, benefits, the works. You'd be traveling to schools, meeting with administrators, identifying talented kids who need support, basically doing what you did for Maya, but for hundreds of children." Margaret's breath caught. "I'm 55 years old. I don't have a college degree. I don't have experience in—" "You have something better than experience, Margaret. You have perspective. You've lived in both worlds. You know what these kids need because you've been their mother, their protector, their champion, and you know how to make powerful people uncomfortable enough to listen. That's not a skill you learn in college." Margaret thought about it, about spending her days identifying brilliant minds being wasted in underfunded schools, about making phone calls to wealthy donors and demanding they see what she saw in Maya, about being the voice for children who desperately needed someone to speak up, about finally, after 55 years, being truly visible. "When do I start?" she asked. Crawford's laugh was warm. "Maya said you'd say yes. She's sending the contract tomorrow. Welcome to the team, Margaret." The call ended. Margaret sat in her chair, in her house that her daughter had bought her, surrounded by evidence of impossible dreams made real, and she laughed. It started as a chuckle, then built into something bigger, joy and relief and vindication and hope all mixed together into something that couldn't be contained. She laughed because she'd spent 8 years being invisible, and now she was about to become one of the most visible advocates in the education system. She laughed because the world had tried to tell her daughter to be small, and Maya had responded by becoming extraordinary. She laughed because somewhere David was probably laughing too, proud of the daughter he'd never gotten to see grow up, proud of the wife who'd fought like hell to give that daughter every possible chance. But mostly Margaret laughed because the story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time the whole world was going to watch. 2 years after Margaret joined Maya's foundation, they stood together in the East Room of the White House. President Richardson was presenting Maya with the National Medal of Innovation for her work in breaking down language barriers and creating opportunities for underprivileged students. But Maya had insisted on one condition. Her mother would stand beside her during the ceremony. "Miss Hayes," the president said, reading from prepared remarks, "your story reminds us that genius isn't confined to privilege. that brilliance can emerge from anywhere, if we're willing to see it. Maya stepped to the microphone, her voice steady and clear. Mr. President, members of Congress, distinguished guests, I didn't save that business deal because I'm special. I saved it because my mother worked 3 jobs to keep our library card active, because she chose books over new clothes, education over comfort, my future over her present. She turned to Margaret, who stood in an elegant navy dress, the first time she'd worn something that hadn't come from a thrift store or a clearance rack. Every child we help through our foundation, every scholarship we fund, every door we open, that's not my achievement. That's hers, because she taught me the most important lesson, that being underestimated is temporary but being exceptional is forever. The room erupted in applause. Later at the reception, a young black girl approached them shyly. She couldn't have been more than 10, wearing a purple jacket that looked suspiciously familiar, worn but loved. Excuse me, Miss Hayes, my name is Alicia. I'm from Detroit and I just got accepted to Whitmore Academy on your scholarship program. Her eyes were bright with tears. My mama works as a janitor at a hospital. She says you and your mama are proof that we belong everywhere. Maya knelt down eye level with the girl. Your mama's right. And Alicia, when you get to Whitmore and someone questions whether you belong there, and they will, I want you to remember something. What? That you're not there to fit in. You're there to excel. There's a difference. Alicia nodded solemnly, then hugged Maya tight. Margaret watched them, her heart full, thinking about the girl in the purple jacket who'd walked into a boardroom and changed the world, and the girl in the purple jacket who was about to do the same. The circle was complete, but the story would continue. With every child they helped, every door they opened, every voice they amplified. One genius at a time, one purple jacket at a time, until no one was invisible anymore. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Like the video to support more stories like this, and subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next upload.